Today we are moving on to a different world region to start looking at classical civilizations that developed around the Mediterranean Sea in Europe, namely ancient Greece and ancient Rome. And we'll be looking at how the physical geography of Europe shaped those early classical civilizations. Remember, as we've learned before, that different kinds of topographical features can isolate societies or bring them together, encouraging diffusion depending. So mountains, for example, really hard to cross. They tend to isolate societies from one another when the geography is really mountainous. On the other hand, bodies of water that you can sail across, like rivers or the Mediterranean Sea, tend to encourage cultural diffusion and bring people together because they're pretty easy to get through. We also need to remember that there are very different forms of states that exist. A state is a territory with a formal government and legally defined borders. They come in many shapes and sizes. They can be kingdoms ruled by a king, they can be modern democratic nations, and they can be something called a city-state, which is a single city under one leader. First, have a look at the map. Right, is generally blessed by geography for a couple of reasons. One, it's in a temperate climate, so agriculture can grow in this part of the world. Two, it is surrounded by bodies of water that you can sail across, making Europe a hub of diffusion, historically speaking. Three, if you look at Italy and you look at Greece, you'll notice a bunch of mountains, right? Mountains, as we just said, tend to discourage diffusion. So we'll see how those mountains encouraged these societies to develop. Also notice that giant Mediterranean Sea. Greece and Italy are both peninsulas in the Mediterranean Sea, which, as you can imagine, led them both to develop as really strong sea trading civilizations that put them into contact with lots of other different civilizations from the Middle East, Asia, Africa, all very close at hand if you can navigate that Mediterranean Sea. So you can start piecing together how geography shaped the history of this continent, Europe. Like we just said, located in the middle latitudes, Europe has a temperate climate with all 4 seasons. That means that agriculture grows. You can plant food, you can grow it. It has therefore been a pretty rich hub of civilization for most of history. It was a central hub of trade and cultural diffusion just because of where it was located. It was a strategic location between Asia and Africa, crisscrossed by many rivers that you can sail through, with access to large bodies of water, some of which were easier to sail than others. The Mediterranean Sea that Italy and Greece both kind of hang into is very navigable, and both the Greeks and the Romans and many other cultures managed it. Mediterranean means between the worlds, and for the ancient Greeks and ancient Romans, that's exactly what they believed the sea to be. If you look in the middle of the slide, you'll see an ancient world map dating from the times of Herodotus, a Greek historian, the very first historian. And their view of the world really was kind of built around the Mediterranean Sea with not much else around it, as you guys can tell. Western civilization, so-called Western civilization, develops around the classical cultures of ancient Greece and ancient Rome. Western Civ is like kind of a controversial term now. It generally means civilizations with European origins. So Europe plus the places it conquered and settled in long enough to make a real mark. And the hallmarks of that civilization really find in ancient Greece and ancient Rome. And as we go over these next several lessons, I think you'll see a lot that you will find familiar. So starting with ancient Greece, classical Greece. the origins of Western civilization. And I have geography as destiny here because it is so clear how geography really shaped ancient Greece into what it became. Ancient Greece, like we learned about before, was the birthplace of so many of our fundamental ideas. It's really hard to list them all, but I'm going to try over the next couple of days. We get our ideas about democracy from ancient Greece. We get our classic storytelling structures from ancient Greece, heroes, villains, hubris, all of these like really, really structuring ideas in terms of how we tell stories. They also invented history, which for me is very important, and rationalist philosophy, which I also particularly like. In our study of Greece, we're going to spend our most time in Athens over the next couple of days, but there was more than Athens to it for sure. And here is where your notes should begin. In terms of today, we're going to be looking at how physical geography made an impact on the human geography of Greece. How did the place itself shape the culture that developed? So, first thing you could notice from the map is that Greece is incredibly rocky and mountainous and really, really, really difficult to travel across. So as a result, its effect on human geography, Greece was incredibly difficult to conquer or to unify politically because those mountains kind of blocked everybody in their own little space. So Greece developed into independent city-states with different governments and values that shared a broader culture, namely religion, language. Athens, for example, was a city-state that enjoyed a golden age of philosophy and discovery. It was democratic. Sparta was a very different city-state. In my view, it was kind of a terrifying military oligarchy. And if you ever get a chance to look up how the Spartans lived, do. It's kind of fascinating, actually. Both of these city-states are depicted in the movie 300 that I know lots of you guys have seen. So the mountains isolated each city-state from one another, even though they shared a culture. They weren't ruled by one overarching government in this time period that we're looking at. However, geography blessed Greece with connections that would lead it to be just the site of a flowering culture. And those connections have to do with the water. The Greek peninsula is on the Mediterranean Sea. That means it's sitting in a place that is connected to numerous other civilizations by a body of water that at that point in history they could cross. That meant that there was a lot of seaborne trade, a lot of cultural diffusion, and a lot of contact with different civilizations. Money, plus these ideas that you get from interacting with other civilizations, led to a golden age. The Athenian Golden Age we're going to talk about in a different lesson, but I will give you the broad strokes here. It's really hard to put it all on one list, but it includes developing democracy, a system of government where the people choose their leaders and their laws by voting. Rationalism, a philosophy about understanding your world based on reason and logic and what you can observe as opposed to just believing what you are told on faith. They invented history in the sense of a story about what happens based on a human, earth-based cause and effect, not what the gods did or did not want to happen. They invented philosophy, and they made huge advances in science and math. So, classical Greece, specifically Athens, experienced a golden age. And we will be looking at different aspects of this golden age over the next couple of days. Specifically, we'll look at philosophy, love of wisdom, how to live a good life, what ethics should people have, how should society be structured. We'll be looking at like logic and rationalism, which are rules for thinking that will reliably lead you to true conclusions. And although we won't have a lot of time to look at this in this class, in your English classes, I hope, you get to focus on how the Greeks affected the way that we tell stories through myths, through plays, through the Odyssey and the Iliad and epic poetry, and our archetypes, the way that we think about humanity, right? What makes a hero? What are fatal flaws? What do we have to look out for? Greece influenced Rome. Greek art, architecture, religion, ideas about politics, ideas about philosophy diffused because Rome's right next door in Italy, that second peninsula, right? So in the short term, it diffused to influence Rome. And in the long term, it diffused to the Middle East by the conquests of a man named Alexander the Great, who we will also be looking at in short order. So all of this leads us to origins of Western civilization. Right? The key ideas that really start defining European culture and civilization in a way that have endured and spread. We've got the Greek story where trade and diffusion leads to money and ideas, which leads to a golden age. But we also have the other half of the story in classical Rome. Greece influenced Rome, and Rome kind of picked up the baton of developing classical civilization after Greece began to decline. Rome's religion even was basically the same religion as the Greeks, they just changed the names of the gods. So as you can see on the maps on the bottom, I keep saying Rome. Rome was the name of the empire that began to develop in the peninsula of Italy. Rome is now the capital city of Italy. But at the time, especially as the Roman Empire expanded, the whole state was called Rome, so that's why I'm doing that. You can see that Greece and Rome are very close together, and we're very well connected through trade. So diffusion should be an obvious consequence of that. Classical Rome gave Western civilization a different kind of legacy. It was a republic on the Italian peninsula, and then it became an empire that included most of Europe. So it gave us a couple of different forms of government. Specifically, a republic is a different kind of democracy that's representative. It's the kind that the United States has. And because it became a big, powerful empire, it really imprinted this Greek-Roman culture on the entire territory that it ruled, such that even after the empire fell, Europe remained indelibly marked by its legacy. And it provided, the history of the Roman Empire provided a cultural unity to the region in Europe long after political unity had vanished. That means that, like, even though Europe was fractured into different states after the fall of Rome, people in Europe had some pretty major things in common as a result of having been ruled by the one superstate, the Roman Empire. Those things came to include religion. Eventually, down the line, Christianity became the official religion of Rome. And so when the Roman Empire fell, Christianity remained the dominant religion in Europe. Language is another really key place where this legacy exists. The official language of the Roman Empire was Latin, and Latin evolved into a number of separate Romance languages like French, Italian, Spanish, Romanian, you name it. Government also an enduring influence of Rome. Rome was a republic based on the idea of separation of powers. It had a senate to represent, its citizens, and Rome focused pretty intensely on developing ideas about law, ideas that endured and that have continued to influence governments in the West. And then finally, in terms of philosophy, philosophy was primarily a Greek thing. The Romans focused mostly on like rhetoric and law and more intense stuff, but they did further develop a philosophy called Stoicism, which I personally am a big fan of, and I'll tell you all about it one of these days if you ever give me an excuse to. Greece and Rome are also big in pop culture, so I'm not going to do this often, but I have to say the Assassin's Creed line of video games is pretty amazing for their attention to detail and relative accuracy. So if you want to get a chance to look at what it might have been like to stroll the streets of ancient Greece, messing around in Assassin's Creed Odyssey is actually not the worst way of doing it. You've probably also seen ancient Greece in the 300 movies. There's a Netflix series called Troy, Fall of a City about the Iliad. And there's also a Netflix series called Myth and Monsters that's about this idea of archetypes, the way we tell stories over time and how they're similar. That's pretty fascinating. In terms of Rome, I'm sure you've heard of Rome. There is the HBO show Rome. There's the Roman Empire on Netflix. Gladiator is a movie that a lot of people have seen. You've heard of these places. So over the next several lessons, we're going to be looking more in depth at both Greece and Rome, and I hope you enjoy this series of lessons.